Okay, so we're just going to pick right back up where we left off in the personality lecture. We're going to move from the Neo-Freudians and Freud and the psychoanalytic perspective to the humanistic perspective on personality. And so one thing I want to remind you guys, so we've talked about behaviorism in the past. Remember, behaviorism is all about observable behavior. We talked about the psychoanalytic approach, which really emphasizes the unconscious mental processes, as well as this idea that early childhood experiences were very important. And then finally, the humanistic perspective, which we've talked about humanistic psychology in the past. And so essentially, I want to remind you that a humanistic perspective really focuses on bringing the human back into a psychology. And that, we're focused more on this healthy personality, and that the individual we're focused on the individual's conscious, subjective perception of his or herself. And that's the most important aspect of personality, is this idea of the self. When humanistic psychology came about, it was referred to as the third force. Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow were two really big proponents and creators of this area, this perspective. And so they saw that people were innately good. They wanted to focus on healthy personality. They didn't like the laboratory research with rats and pigeons and behaviorism. And they suggested that the most important factor, of course, is this perception of self. They really emphasize this, people are inherently good. They have a lot of we have potential, and we need to seek out that potential and actualize ourselves. This idea of what is self-concept and what is healthy personality development. And really one of the individuals it started with was Carl Rogers. Now, Carl Rogers realized this very interesting thing. So up until this point, those psychologists and psychiatrists and physicians who saw people come into their office referred to those people as patients. If you came in to see Freud, you were his patient. Rogers thought, okay, you know what? I don't like this idea of patient. I like that my people that come in and talk to me, they have a very active role in their therapy, and they should play an active role. And so he actually stopped calling people patients, and he actually started calling them clients. And what you'll find is that psychiatrists and doctors refer to their people as patients, whereas counseling, clinical, psychologists, the psychologists call their people clients. And so he also made this very interesting observation that most of his clients came in, and a lot of them would say things like, I'm just not sure who I am. And so he goes, wow, people are really trying to understand their own identity. They're trying to figure out who they are. And so he really wanted to think about this in the sense of what we refer to as actualizing tendency, which is what he referred to as the basic human motive. He believed that this was an innate drive to maintain and enhance the human organism. Essentially, this was for us to be who we need to be and to move on with our lives. And so he developed this idea of self-concept, which is where he kind of started coining the term because of this people coming in asking the question, who am I? And so developing who you are, an idea of perception of who you are, is this idea of self-concept. And we know that this begins, this is your set of perceptions, the beliefs that you hold about yourself, who you think you are. This begins really early in life. And so it's shaped by essentially how we are taught early on in life about love and early on about how we should be valued. And so he believed he talked about this thing called unconditional positive regard and unconditional positive regard. And so essentially this idea of regard is how you're valued and how you're loved. The idea of unconditional positive regard is, in essence, when you're a child, your sense of being unconditionally loved and valued, even if you do not conform to standards and expectations of others, for example, your parents. So let's say you do something wrong, you break a vase, and you get in trouble, and you lie about it. and you don't do what you're supposed to. And your parents go, you know what? I still love you. We see cases of kids doing and later adults doing really bad things, and their parents saying, even though they did really bad things, even though they didn't follow the path that I wanted them to, I still love them and I still cherish them and value them. That would be what's considered unconditional positive regard. Conditional positive regard is where we see that a child's sense of being valued and loved is only if he or she behaves in a way that's acceptable to others. So, for example, you break the vase. Well, I don't love you because you broke the vase. Or I only love you when you behave. I only love you if you become a doctor. I only, and so we also find this, for example, this conditional positive regard in homosexual individuals. So a family might say, well, we are going to disown you if you go into a homosexual relationship. And so essentially what it is that person is only being valued and loved if they choose to behave in a way that's acceptable or conforming to their family. So if they decide, okay, well, all right, well, I'm going to be in a heterosexual relationship then, and I'm going to find a partner who is opposite sex, and I'm going to not live this life of a homosexual person. And then, of course, they continue to allow it to be in the family. So that would be conditioned. It's under conditions that person is regarded or loved or valued. And so, of course, that can be an issue all in itself. So, the humanistic perspective made a super great contributions to psychotherapy, to counseling and to education, as well to parenting. We see a lot of self-help books, a lot of books of how you can achieve the person you want to be, forming your own identity, if you're going through an existential crisis and how to do that. There were a lot of parenting books that were written by humanistic psychologists to say, you need to unconditionally love your child. You need to make sure that your child understands that, no matter what they do, they're still going to be valued. That's a really big area is actually a lot of these self-help books and these parenting books. And so, this idea of the subjective experience, how do you feel? This subjective experience is based on you, the subject. And so your subjective experience is going to be different from your friend's subjective experience or your family member's experience. And this idea of what is self-concept, who are you? Very, very, well received, widely accepted concepts. But of course, there has been some limitations to this. Very much like psychoanalytic approach, it's very difficult to test. It's difficult to validate. If you say, self-actualization, and I want to achieve who I am, what does that mean? That's completely arbitrary. So it's very difficult to test and validate scientifically. It's also based on assumptions, based off of observations, rather than actual empirical experimental work. It tends to be overly optimistic. And so we talked about Freud being overly pessimistic. So he's on one side of the spectrum, and the humanistic psychologists are on the other side of the spectrum. And essentially, they're being overly optimistic, and they minimize the fact that people can be very destructive. And they can not only, they can be self-destructive, and they can also harm other people. So if you look at Freud versus Rogers on human nature, what we find is just diametrically opposed views of human nature. Freud being extremely pessimistic, essentially saying that the essence of human nature is destructive, that we have an aggressive instinct, it's innate, persistent, and pervasive. Rogers' view on human nature is very positive, forward-moving, very constructive, realistic, very trustworthy, and that if we have a choice, humans actually naturally gravitate toward positive growth for self and for society. And what we're finding is, of course, that that's probably overly optimistic. So I'm going to end this video. We're going to continue on with the social cognitive perspective, and then we're going to talk about the trait perspective. So then that will end our personality discussion.